Earlier this month on Religious Freedom Day, President Biden said his administration is standing against religious persecution around the world. Critics say much more needs to be done. Tough action speaks louder than words. Our next guest believes American diplomats must work with religious communities if they are to respond successfully to the many challenges now facing the world. Shaun Casey taught and worked at several seminaries and universities, including Harvard Divinity School, Georgetown University, and Berkeley. He served as special representative for religion and global affairs at the U.S. State Department. He's author of the book, Chasing the Devil at Foggy Bottom. Shaun, it's a pleasure to have you with us. So in your book, you write, quote, "The ability to understand the complex dynamics of religion now is virtually non-existent in the current administration, and that is a troubling prospect against the background of our increasingly unruly world." So explain more. To what extent do you see this administration making religious rights or not making it a priority of U.S. policy and diplomacy?
Well, Gary, first of all, thanks for having me on here. It's an honor, and thank you for this time to talk about my book. Back in 2006, a former Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, wrote a book called The Mighty and the Almighty. And she talked about the fact that as Secretary of State, she had an army of experts on thousands of different subjects. But when it came to religion, there was really nobody to call in the State Department who could answer her questions from a position of knowledge and expertise. Fast forward to 2013, and Secretary of State John Kerry shared Madeleine Albright's view that the State Department had missed opportunities diplomatically in the past because they didn't have a capacity to interpret religion. And so he hired me away from the Wesley Theological Seminary here in Washington, D.C., to set up the Office of Religion and Global Affairs. And he told us, I want you to scour the world and find opportunities for us to have a deeper understanding of the religious dynamics of these various countries, and then train our diplomats on how we can be more sophisticated in engaging those groups. So for the next 4 years, I ran the Office of Religion and Global Affairs, and we worked with dozens of embassies and bureaus here in the Washington, D.C. area to try to help our diplomats understand the various demographics religiously around the world and what difference that would make for U.S. foreign policy. You fast forward to the Trump administration, our office was shut down, and so far through the first 2 years of the Biden administration, it has not been restarted. So it's really not a partisan issue. I think both parties, as they have led the State Department, have struggled to fully understand religion to the extent they probably should.
Well, Americans are facing many problems here at home, so why should they be concerned about religious rights, religious freedom in countries like Somalia or India, elsewhere?
Well, it's beyond just religious rights. We do have and have had an Office of International Religious Freedom since 1998. It's their mission to monitor and then to advocate for religious freedom. That was not our mission. Let me recite a few issues for you, just to name a few beyond religious freedom, keeping in mind that that was not our mission. That was the other offices. We worked on refugees. Right now, there are estimates that soon there will be hundreds of millions of refugees around the world. The current record, which we're in the midst of, is about 80 million refugees. And many of those people, well, they're on the move. To be a refugee, you have to have fled your country because of persecution. We also worked in countries to work against public corruption. We ran anti-corruption workshops in places like Nigeria, working with both Christian communities and Muslim communities. And so the list goes on and on beyond simply religious freedom, that there were many public issues that religious communities are involved in around the world. And Americans have to care about that. We care if there's a flood of refugees coming our way. Are there things we can do to help resettle those folks close to home or eventually back in their own countries? Are there ways that religious communities can continue to provide global health services to underserved populations? Can they help eradicate poverty in their own countries and regions? Can they mitigate and adapt to climate change and the ravages it's having on global agriculture? So there were dozens of issues that we worked on around the world that, if we didn't make progress on, there were going to be more people knocking at our door, wanting to flee the terrible living conditions or political conditions they found themselves working under.
And some that were very challenging, I'm sure, for you. When you served under President Obama during his presidency, we saw ISIS slaughtering Christians and other people of minority faiths. We saw Muslim Brotherhood followers destroying churches, killing Christians in Egypt. So what challenges did those situations pose for you as religion and global affairs diplomat at the U.S. State Department?
Well, one of the things we participated in was Secretary Kerry's process of declaring that ISIS had been guilty of genocide against Christians, Muslims, and other groups. I was part of a small group of people who came together to advise him on whether or not the United States should declare that ISIS had committed genocide. And we came up with a recommendation that he should do that. And indeed, that was what his own inclination was. So we were able to use international law, and eventually we hope to be able to hold those folks accountable. At the same time, when the Obama administration built the global coalition to defeat ISIS, I was part of a group that met with leaders in the Gulf area. We met in Kuwait to discuss the beginnings of the strategy that led ultimately to the demise and defeat of ISIS. So it was an issue that we spent a lot of time working on.
Okay, the book is Chasing the Devil at Foggy Bottom. Shaun Casey, thank you for sharing your time and insights. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Gary. It's been great to be with you.